are your inner demons? Now, before you go and blurt it out or write it into the comments section, this is not show and tell time. This is me asking you at home a private conversation to get started. This is for your reflection only. So consider to yourself, what are your inner demons? What are some of the parts of yourself that you tuck away but have an influence on who you are and how you work? I mean, every single one of us carries scars with us, let's say, from hurts that have both been inflicted upon and sometimes inflicted by us. We carry with us failures of nerve, failures of character, opportunities that have been wasted, and the regrets of paths that were not taken. I think mixed up with that, all at the same time, are relationships we wish we could get back, maybe even just closure of relationships we wish we could get back. And for some of us, there is trauma that lies so deep, so intimate within ourselves that we've forgotten the many ways that we have sought to drown out the pain through self-medication. These demons can be almost frenemies, to use a phrase that has gotten popular in the last 20 years. These friends that are almost also enemies, that they get back at us, that turn us over. I would say that to think of our inner demons as frenemies is almost to see the toxic side of our own reflection, the toxic side of our own personality. So I ask again, what are your inner demons? In our story today, Jesus comes to preach at a synagogue on a Sabbath, and he amazes everybody. The incident sends shockwaves through the surrounding communities and starts to spread his fame all over the place. But the very heart of the story, however, rests upon one man, one person. And we're told that he shows up suddenly in the story. He has an unclean spirit, we're told. And what happens changes his life and sends a message that this new preacher, Jesus, is a whole other breed, a different sort. Yes, he preaches with authority, we're told, but what takes place between Jesus and the man with an unclean spirit is the very moment that makes sure everybody knows he's destined for something different. So let's hear this story in Mark's gospel and how it calls us to live faith in full. So they went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded by his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, not as the scribes. Just then there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, throwing him into convulsions and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. They were all amazed. And they kept asking one another, what is this? A new teaching with authority? He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him. And at once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. Well, there's our story for today. And several things may pop out at us, but here are just a few. 3 in particular for me. First, it is the Sabbath, and Jesus, for the first time in Mark's gospel, is teaching and preaching at a synagogue. And in this version from Mark's gospel, it's a smashing success this time around. People seem to be raving about how he teaches in a way they've never seen. And to be frank with you, I think this alone, the fact that he preaches with such authority, would have made him the talk of the town, maybe even all of Galilee, just by itself. And then that's a second thing that starts to pop out at us. The story is one that changes the very trajectory of Jesus' ministry. So they are astounded by his preaching, and it makes waves. That's that second piece of it. it changes the very trajectory of Jesus' ministry in Galilee right off the bat. The stories that come after this one are like this, runaway landslide, a snowball effect where his ministry is growing and getting bigger and bigger. And all of this ends up leading to his arrest and crucifixion. And in between those two, hearing that he's preaching on the Sabbath and preaching with authority, astounding people, in between that and the news of it getting out to all of Galilee, right at the very center of the story is this man and his unclean spirit. And there's a healing. There's a return to wholeness. And one part of the story that I keep coming back to over and over again is that this man with the unclean spirit is talking about us. Doesn't respond, Jesus, what do you know about me with my unclean spirit? It's almost as if the spirit is the one crying out to Jesus, saying, hey, what do you have to do with us, this guy and me, the unclean spirit? I'm sure it is strange right off the bat that the Spirit hears Jesus preach and understands that he comes from God. I mean, this is central to the story. He is recognized by the unclean spirit. But the Spirit talks about, what do you have to do with us? Have you come to destroy us? Not this man, not me, the unclean spirit. This inner demon has split this man up in such a way that he's no longer whole. He's a splintered soul. And the unclean spirit calls all of that brokenness us. So to drive out what is unclean, in order to do that, are we destroying the whole? Has that one shard of this man's identity become so integral that as broken up as he is, it is now part of his whole? I mean, the fear seems to be that this man sometimes is his unclean part, unable to be without it, if you would. In order to really talk about this man with this unclean spirit, we need to start almost with another story. Now, really, I think we need to start by recognizing that the very most popular stories these days are about imperfect heroes, these anti-heroes who are often conflicted. They're broken people with storied pasts, but they somehow achieve, in spite of, and sometimes, more rarely, but sometimes, even because of the broken places within them. I mean, at this moment, if you were to turn on Netflix, for example, the very most popular shows on Netflix have a surprising kind of thing in common. From Bridgerton to Cobra Kai to The Queen's Gambit, the stories that connect with us, the viewer, most often these days have a protagonist whose behavior is led, directed, driven by deep wounds of the soul. In Bridgerton, for example, the characters are trying to navigate strict social mores and rules, this immense sense of judgment and scrutiny by the others in their inner circles, all while they are succumbing to and trying to resist human foibles and desire. In Cobra Kai, another show, one that is a reboot of the 1980s classic hit Karate Kid, both Danny and Johnny, both of them inflict unintended harm on others because they are being led by wounds that have shaped how they see the world and others in it. In The Queen's Gambit, a girl's childhood is shattered. There's no other way to put it. Her childhood was one that was completely shattered. And it imprinted on her a way of coping with the trauma of her life that leaves her torn between two different existences. A master of chess on one hand, but an addict on the other. These stories speak to us. In these stories, we see the pain of life. We see problems that we sometimes relate to and sometimes are even shocked by, grateful that that's not us. But we also see a window into redemption. I think that's part of the heart of it all. I think this is the hunger, redemption. It is that hope that whatever is haunting us, whatever is controlling us, whatever it is that seems to be splitting us apart, whatever that is, might be removed. We hunger to feel whole once more. There's a story that I think goes with this. It's about 10 years old now, and I'm not going to be able to remember or recite the entirety of it, but it's of Robert Downey Jr., the actor. And this is back in 2011, I think, sometime in the fall. And he was at an award show or receiving an award. And so Hollywood had, given this to him, and he had asked that Mel Gibson, of all people, be the presenter. Now, in his acceptance speech, Robert Downey Jr. talks about his own struggles with sobriety, his troubles, even his time in prison. He talks about his road to wholeness, his return to Hollywood, the shaking off of his own inner demons of addiction, and finding this path in his own career that he was being celebrated for that very evening. He shared with the crowd that evening that it was Mel Gibson who was one of the very first people to reach out to him, to offer friendship when nobody else would, when he had been written off by the rest of the actors and the guild and everything else. Robert Downey Jr. talks about how it was Mel Gibson who told him about finding a path to forgiveness, seeking it from others, giving it to himself, and that only in that would he find a way of being whole once again. Now, for Mel Gibson, he was talking about faith. And Robert Downey Jr., in front of an entire crowd in Hollywood, talks about faith. Downey told the story about this man who has been a persona non grata for quite a long time now. I mean, Mel Gibson's bouts with addiction, his anti-Semitic tirades, and he seems at least imprinted on the memories of so many people in society today as a man with an unclean spirit on full display. And then Downey asked Hollywood to forgive Mel Gibson, to let him back in, to make room. And that story has stuck with me because I don't think we ever find healing. I don't think we ever find a sense of redemption in our lives when we're out in the cold, when we've been shunned, when we've been pushed away, if we've been hit with what is so popular today, cancel culture. Somewhere forgiveness must be sought and somehow given, and those broken shards of a life need to be made whole once more, be brought together once more. So I go back to our man with this unclean spirit who is talking to Jesus, and he asks that question, what have you, Jesus, got to do with us? So what is that inner demon splitting you apart, perhaps? Making it harder to connect with loved ones. Making it harder to reach deeper into your own self sometimes. To be the you that God has created. Is your own inner demon so comfortable that it is now an old friend or a companion, so deeply a part of your life that you cannot see a way out? I mean, I wish I knew what Jesus had been preaching on that particular Sabbath and teaching about. I wish I had known. I want to know what it is that Jesus said that called that unclean spirit out, that made the unclean spirit react. Because here's what I personally know of Jesus's preaching, his ministry, his life. Jesus came into the world as the very presence of God's full character. Now that can sound very high-minded, but somehow we believe that when we come face to face with this guy, Jesus, we see the very character of God. We witness who God is. And that this calls us back to our truest selves. Doing so, encountering Christ, offers us peace if only we seek it. Works for the peace, the wholeness, the very shalom of God for every single broken soul out there. The redemption we seek has already found us. This is a true statement. The redemption we seek has already found us. The restoration that you may be yearning for in your own prayers sees you, holds you, is with you right now. Let go of what is splitting you apart and be free. Know that you are the beloved of Christ, and that in Christ there is no us, but you are whole once more.